and I'll get things going at the top of the hour. Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for another session of the ALN BIMStorm. Today is the final presentation of this little series, but we will be continuing into the future. You see before us a few of the presenters and panelists for today's event, but there will be others. Before we get into that, just want to thank ALN Platinum organizational member Onuma System, Building Informed Environments. And you can find out more at onuma-bim.com. And we will, of course, be hearing from Kimon Onuma and some other members of the Onuma Inc. team later today in the program. Thank you also to our patron members, as well as all our organizational members. We are very grateful for their continued support of this and other programming. And if you're interested in becoming an organizational member or a supporter, or a collaborator with the ALN, please reach out to anyone here and we will get the conversation started about how we can work together. And so here is the updated image logo for this ALN BIMStorm series. And Mike, I think, will talk a little about the change in branding that we're undergoing. So Mike, Executive Director for the ALN, welcome.
Thank you, Nick. And how are things in Lander, Wyoming today?
Excellent. Spring is finally, feels like it's here. And in the background, you can see one of my own photos, kind of moody, showing just the way the land looks. So beautiful out my back door.
We've got summer in Chicago. It's 82 degrees, but enough of that. Nick was talking about this change in logos. So the Asset Leadership Network is a trade association that wants to reflect the principles and qualities of its members. And our members are agile, as you will see in the presentation today. We started this series as ALN BIMStorm Higher Education to focus on the ability for higher institutions of higher education to improve the management of their own assets and also be aware of how they should be teaching students through their educational programs. And that is still the case. That is definitely still the case. But when Kimon started getting into the artificial intelligence aspect of this, it really exploded. There's been so much interest in it that we're taking a shift. And guess what? Institutions of higher education really need to focus on how they can use this new tool to their best advantage and how they could be teaching their students about it. So we really appreciate all of the work that Kimon Onuma and Onuma Inc., his whole team has been putting into this, and Cyril Virlay and CDV Systems and his team. And we've got other people who are going to be joining us. It's been very dynamic and exciting. Before I introduce Kimon, I want to say that we're really appreciative of our organizational members and all of the people who are interested in watching our program and learning from us. And we've got a lot going on. Even today, later today at 6 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be having the value and benefits from asset management web series continue with our colleagues in Australia at the Asset Management Council. Today we have asset managers from the Australian Royal Navy, or the Royal Australian Navy, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works. And when there was a presentation at the Asset Management Council's AM Peak annual conference, and it was 2-3 deep standing room only about the value and benefits program. And then also when the CEO, Ursula of the Institute of Asset Management presented on the co-published paper between the ALN and the AIA and the Institute of Asset Management, there was huge reception on the asset management leadership paper. And then tomorrow we've got Jack Dempsey. Jack Dempsey is here today, but he's going to be focusing on his wide range of interests in advancing asset management. And then the following Thursday, we've got a company that is focused on the intangible assets of avoiding sexual harassment and sexual abuse in the workplace. It's an intangible asset, but if you get caught up in that, then you're going to be spending your real money on something that's not mission focused. And this is our first foray into something that's really definitely intangible assets. The reputation your organization suffers with that. And Nick, help me. What else do we got going on?
Yeah, you mentioned there were a number of federal programs coming down
Yes.
the pipeline, and they're maybe not nailed down yet, but to stay tuned for that.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Our new patron member, CGI, is we're meeting tomorrow about federal programs, and Serco's federal programs, and Digital Logic has something coming up also. So an explosion of program, thanks to our many organizational members. And Kimon, that was a long introduction. Thanks you for sticking around.
Hello.
Through that.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for all that you have done for this.
Thank you. Yeah, do you want me to just dive right in, or are there any comments or questions?
One thing I want to, kind of like a preemptive statement is that what we're going to be showing is processes. This is not an advertisement for any particular software or program or services. This is the way you can do things. We're trying to let owners know what is possible. They don't even know to specify work to be done in this manner. That's why we're doing this. It's not an advertisement of tools. It's an advertisement of processes. So I hope everyone understands that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's what has been the theme of BIMStorms for many years now. It's really, how do you look at the processes, look at the tools, look at the participants, and figure out how to connect the dots, basically how the wiring happens. One thing that has struck me as we've been kind of exploring this with AI and ChatGPT, remember when we first talked about this, I was kind of reluctant to even announce that we were going to be using it. And we're still in the early stages of testing, and there's still a lot that doesn't work with it, but I think it's worth kind of sharing what we're finding and then getting everybody's input on it as well too. Another thing that has struck me too is that over the years, we've been focused a lot on industry standards and making data machine readable, so we can use it with applications. But making data machine readable leads into machines can actually use it. So that's kind of the interesting angle to this as well too. What can we do with all this? That's kind of the theme of this. And we're going to be carrying this on after today's session too. There's actually a session with the AIA, which we call AIA, AI and AIA actually. And I'll talk about that later. So that's about today. We've had several sessions, and the mural that we've been using, I'll walk through it one by one here, but we've been capturing the process, and it's been going on even until a few minutes ago. We had, like Mike mentioned, Cyril, and with Collectus. There's a lot of interesting things that are happening with that. I also want to mention that the National Institute of Building Sciences was involved as well. Roger Grant was on last few times. And in the National Institute of Building Sciences, there's a digital twin subcommittee, which I'm involved with, which is very, very many similar themes. How do you take machine readable data and use it for the life cycle, real-time access, all that. So a lot of this stuff kind of relates to each other. So I won't
relate on that note. Can we ask Jack Dempsey to make some comments about artificial intelligence? Jack has written a couple of really great articles on artificial intelligence in asset management, and as an ALN board member, an ALN senior fellow, and an ALN organizational member. Jack, do you want to talk about the importance of these tools?
Well,
I'll echo a point that Kimon just made is there's a lot of learning still required. Artificial intelligence gives you the misnomer that it's intelligent. It's actually I think it's a tool, and it's a tool that we have to learn how to use. It's tremendous in terms of its ability to recover and compile and synthesize information. But there's, with all tools, you have to learn how to use that. And it does require a little bit of time to understand how to best use the tool in terms of refining the information that it can be providing to you and purposing that for a workflow. So I don't think the whole answer is there, but it's a tremendous asset, resource, and an exciting future for all of us. So it's really going to be exciting to see how this plays out. And I think we're just scratching the surface, really, in where it starts fitting into our capabilities.
Thank you.
Great point, Jack. In fact, we found that over and over again. We caught it making mistakes, and you need kind of a back and forth right now. I don't know where it's going to head in the future, but one thing I do know for sure is that if we don't engage and find out what this can do, we will lose the opportunity. And where do we fit in? I guess that's the question, and we're still exploring. This is just the very beginning, but we'll walk you through some of that as well too. So at a very broad level, from an asset management perspective, all of this is not just about a project or a single team or even design and construction, even though is part of this, but also, and this has been a theme for all of these sessions, it's really kind of driven by who even starts to have the need for assets and facilities. And we're seeing over and over again that owners are really driving a lot of the discussion. Owners have requirements, like we talked about last time. Roger Grant made a great point. Mike, maybe you can dive into that about what the owners, because the National Institute of Building Sciences, the work that we're doing with NIBS too, has been focusing a lot on how do we help owners ask the right questions, because they have a lot of this knowledge and information just in the wrong format usually.
Kimon, thank you for bringing that up, because in our last program, Roger's in the air right now, otherwise he'd be here. Roger said that owners are missing out on the benefits that the technology are bringing to the architects, the engineers, and the contractors. And it's falling off the face of the earth before it gets to the owners. And Cyril is going to be addressing some of this and what he has been experiencing and how he is working with Kimon to demonstrate his capabilities of bringing the information about assets that are in building information models to the owners. And I was so happy when Roger said owners are missing out on the value of the technology. So I just wanted to repeat his concept there, and we really want to bring this to the owners.
Right. And we've seen this over and over again. I don't know, Young, if you're on, if you want to say anything, but the owners drive a lot of the discussion. I think they're obviously the ones that fund a lot of this, and they have a lot of their standards, often with thousands of pages of PDFs or documents or in people's heads, and converting it into a machine readable format has been a pattern that we've seen way before you even start into design, construction, and asset management. Young, jump right in if you're available.
He's not on right now, Kimon, I'm sorry.
He is, because I'm chatting with him on another line here.
He is. I can either allow him to speak or upgrade him to a panelist. So that
Panelist, sorry.
I will promote you. Looks like he's coming in right now.
Yeah, so while Young's coming in, some of the things that you see here in this BIMStorm mimic a lot of the actual examples that we've seen now in the industry, including the work with NIBS and then our other work with the community colleges and higher education. And there's definitely kind of a repeating theme here that we see.
Right. And one thing I just wanted to add to what Kimon was talking about regarding owners, one of the things that we have worked with a lot of different owners in the past, and one of the things, a recurring theme that we have seen is oftentimes when you are in the day-to-day trenches and the work that you're doing, oftentimes you don't necessarily get the opportunity to step back and look at new opportunities to actually go ahead and not only leverage the information that you're always working on a day-to-day basis, but to be able to say, oh, wow, we've been conducting our businesses in this manner, and this has always taken 8 steps. But then with some of these new tools and technologies and ways that we can collaborate, maybe that could get truncated to like 2 or 3 steps. And then so one of the things that we're always interested in is, as we do these BIM storms, we ourselves are actually learning and testing and trying to push the boundaries of how we can go ahead and improve those business processes as we look at all these different kinds of information that the owners are always looking at and working with and conducting their analyses.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and so last time we actually gave some examples of this. So when we started building the healthcare requirement spaces, the reason we were able to use ChatGPT to even ask the database, what do we need for a clinic, is because this particular set of healthcare owner requirements were converted into a format, a machine readable format that's accessible and programmed to BIM. This is just one example, but because it has all this data in there, you could say, give me a clinic, what do I need in it? It goes and grabs the pieces that are needed and starts to assemble, well, here's an early program requirement. That sounds pretty simple when you just kind of mention it like that, but in terms of having a machine do that, it's pretty interesting because it's kind of understanding, okay, if you have 5,000 patients and this is what you need, we still had to review it and correct it. And that's the back and forth with ChatGPT that we showed last time. But this is the healthcare requirements of this owner for spaces and for assets. These are a list of asset types that are important for healthcare planning in this example. And you'll see this data reappear again later on when Cyril comes on to talk about actually making its way into the design and construction and handover into operations. How do these assets get tracked? If an owner has a list of assets with very simple IDs and information related to them, they can describe that in a format that architects and the industry and machines like ChatGPT can understand. Another example of an order in which we had several sessions ago with the California community colleges was at the state level. The entire state of California has a space inventory because they use the space inventory to track needs. So what is the demand for a new community college or a new classroom, or a new laboratory, or a new clinic? Because they have this in a database, and because that database is accessible, then in our case, with our work with them, we're able to link directly to it and pull the space inventory into other applications, including planning, design, and then off into operations. And what we've seen over and over again is that many owners really struggle with just the basics of keeping track of their inventory of spaces, let alone 5,000 buildings and several 100,000 spaces. But once you have it in a database and it's made accessible, then you can start linking it to graphics, whether the graphics of a floor plan of a building or graphics of a map, and then being able to start running scenarios and plan with that data. So this was the Build LACCD and LA Community College District that presented with us several sessions ago with the Asset Leadership Network, and for their capital planning and also into facility management. So with that, what we did, and I won't go because we presented the details last time about what we did, but I'll just start at the beginning. You can go back into the previous session, but essentially we started in saying, well, what if we used ChatGPT and kind of taught it the owner's requirements to take this data that this owner has in this database and store it in a table in ChatGPT? So that's a question I asked, and you'll see throughout this presentation, there's kind of these pink squares that are humans asking questions, basically, and then we have green squares of the response that says, sure, here's a table. It creates a table. And then we asked it, can you create an architectural program with that? And then it actually said, okay, here's a program. So it's using the rules that we fed it, say, what do we need for a clinic? And it starts generating the beginnings of a clinic. There were several back and forths here, including some errors that we caught. So this is what Jack mentioned earlier. It's not perfect. So you have to kind of watch it. And you also, we found over and over again, it's really kind of, how do you ask the question? It's just like you're having a conversation. If you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right response. Anybody have any thoughts on that? I thought that was pretty interesting, just kind of that back and forth discovery that's continued the last few weeks as well, too.
So that brings up a great point that Cyril and Jason from CDV Systems brought up. We were doing a a private session, and I made the comment that ChatGPT is like having an intern. And Cyril and Jason both at the same time said, oh no, it's way better than an intern. It's like having a master planner with you. So sure, it makes mistakes, but it's making mistakes at very high levels. And yes, you always have to check everybody's work all the time anyway. So if you assume that a machine is going to do it for you perfectly, that's your fault. That's illogical.
Yeah. And that actually, that use case there even happens even before you use AI. And that's part of the BIMStorm, right? When you start working in a BIMStorm, in a workshop, in a charrette like this, you start seeing other people's decisions, then you can react. If you can't see it, you can't react. And that's often the challenge in a lot of these complex workflows, that things happen in the background they don't see and they keep running for a month or so. And then you say, well, that's a mistake. We want to try and catch those early. And that's kind of the agile approach to, okay, let's expose everything and decisions we're making. So that was the initial, let's create a clinic, the program. So that with this list, we were able to load it into our program now. We create our own applications for many years. We basically loaded that table into our program, and it spits out a result that kind of looked like this. Here are all the spaces that you need for a clinic. And this happened within minutes, basically. We took the table out as just an Excel file and loaded it into our program. We're in development now of connecting directly, and that's what Thomas has been exploring for us as well too. What can we do on our side when we're building our own applications? One side note here about application development: we started developing our own application years ago, decades ago, a decade and a half or 2 decades or whatever it is. But even back then, I thought that the building and facilities and asset management industry, as time goes by, it's going to be easier to build your own applications. We're all kind of application developers in many ways. If you think in terms of how do we organize information, now it's much easier to build apps. So for example, I have one here, I think. Yeah, we built an app just with that database for this clinic. This was just, it takes a few minutes to build a simple app, but we have our own apps as well too. But the ChatGPT API is interesting because it will start to allow us to connect directly rather than feeding the data manually into the prompt. Thomas, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I know it's still very early, but we're testing and developing that as well too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't have anything right now. Right.
Okay, good. All right, so one thing that happened since the last session, we also looked from a risk perspective. Once we had this initial program for a clinic, we said, okay, yeah, this is going to take a year to build, but if you have had an earthquake or if you're planning for a disaster and you want to have a field clinic, temporary field clinic quickly, what can we do to build a temporary field clinic? So we asked, we basically created a fork over here where we tried a different thing. We said, okay, since this clinic will take 12 months, give us a subset of spaces that we could build for a temporary field clinic. That was a question we had a couple of weeks ago. So it created the new requirement here. And since then, actually in the last few days, we took this requirement of a subset and we created a field clinic that kind of looks like this. So this is actually in the model as well too. It's a temporary building, a smaller building than the full set. So there's kind of several things happening in parallel here. Okay, I won't go through the rest of what we showed last time, but jumping forward to the continuation of this design when we started working with Cyril, and with Cyril, it's been very recent. This is another thing that happens that we like with BIMstorms. We can very rapidly start interacting with other participants, and participants meaning we're actually doing workshopping and working with the data rather than just talking about it, right? That's an important part of the workshop process in BIMstorm. We sent this to CDV Systems and Collectus and Cyril and said, what can you do with this BIM that we created through ChatGPT and the Onuma system with Program to BIM, and can you take it into Revit and take these requirements that came from the owner? Remember the owner requirements I talked early on? The owner says how many air changes they need, all this kind of stuff here. Oh, one interesting side note here. I also fed into ChatGPT. This is what the owner thinks they need for air changes and exhaust and the type of floor finishes. If we're going for LEED Platinum, what adjustments should we make in terms of sustainability and carbon, reducing our carbon footprint. And it actually gave a recommendation, which we fed back into the model as well. So it's been kind of this looping factor where we kind of get some results, we feed it back in, and it gives us some other ideas. So with this model, we handed this to Cyril. We also refined the layout. So this is kind of the rough layout, the first rough layout, human-generated layout. In other words, we dragged the shapes into what we think is kind of a layout that might make sense. You notice there's a lot of blank space in between, so it still needs an architect or an engineer or another machine to actually figure this out. But this is our BIM in the Onuma system now that we then refined the layout, and we went back and forth with Cyril. And then Cyril imported this into Revit. We have a plugin from Onuma system to Revit with a format called BIMXML that lands all the spaces, the components, the objects as families. And then Cyril is going to walk us through what he did with this in a few minutes. So that's kind of the quick kind of an overview here, how we ended up here. And yeah, go ahead.
All right. So if you focus in on the Revit model, I'd like to make a couple of points. So we're talking about a building, but we're not talking about only facility asset management. There's a natural divide between facility asset management and the personal property and equipment that goes in the buildings. And Kimon and his approach have been breaking that apart for a long time. And the image that shows all of the pieces of equipment in the building, although the walls and ceilings aren't there, demonstrates that owners can break down the barriers between facility asset management and personal property asset management. And these tools and processes give them the ability to increase the value from their assets by knowing what the assets are and where they are throughout the life cycle of the property and the assets. This is something that isn't really discussed a lot, but we have been emphasizing this, and I want that to be clear. And then also what Cyril and Kimon did is show the architectural process, because there's never a time when the schematic design results exactly in what comes out for the final design. The owner's requirements change, financial issues change, site conditions change, demands from customers change. There's always changes, and they captured some of that changes. So is this a good time to bring Cyril on now, Kimon?
Yeah, a couple more points to what you just said.
Okay.
One is, there's a personal property in the building, which essentially is the furniture and equipment that we're seeing here. Then when you get into MEP assets, like the air handling unit on the roof or whatever, which is what Cyril's going to show, how does it transition into the designer or the engineers and making decisions based on these owner requirements? What's different here is that from the very beginning of the project, we have the spaces with the furniture and equipment laid out in it based on what the owner thinks they need, along with what they think the floor finish should be, for example, the air changes should be. The designers and architects then make decisions which result in actual product being installed here. In the case of a healthcare facility, the personal property is pretty high value equipment in a lot of cases. It's medical equipment. So there's a need to track certain things. Each owner has a different level of interest of what's important to them to track in a building. So some owners might not care at all about personal property. In the case of a healthcare facility, there might be a need to track just the high value medical equipment, for example, because that's critical to the functionality of the facility. And your point about, as the design progresses, things change. So it's kind of this moving target. We're planning kind of a virtual, well, here's what we think we want from the owner. Here's a refined version. Here's a first version that the designers worked on. Now we're transitioning into actually designing and constructing the facility. What does that look like? And how do we add additional information to it? Because more and more data, for example, warranty and whatever that Cyril's going to show, attached to a piece of equipment. Do we want to talk a little bit about the floor finish here before you track to Cyril? Or
No, not yet, because Ryan is about to jump on, so.
okay, all right. So after Cyril, so I guess we could transition to Cyril and we'll bounce back and forth after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cyril's handoff was, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but it came in here. And I think,
Right.
Cyril, you're going to show some things live, right? Would you like me to show anything here before you jump into live, or?
Actually, what I'll do is I'll just flip to my screen. That'd be
Yeah,
great.
that's good. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay,
perfect.
good. So I've got to somehow show my screen. Share my screen.
Stop
Here we go.
sharing. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks
Good
for
to see-
jumping in at the last minute too. When we started talking a few weeks ago, we didn't think we were going to get this far, but it's pretty exciting.
It's all good. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, good. So I just wanted to just a quick background. We've been BIM consultants to the AEC and owners market for 20 years. And from our perspective, what we've found is that these owners receive models all the time from the builders, from the architects, from the contractors, the engineers, and they don't know how to use them. And from our perspective, the key is the models need a consistent data structure that can be passed across all trades. So we always, I'm going to take a big step back here. Here, we always ask the question to the owner. The first step to managing an asset is to locate it. That's the key. And these models that are being built by the architects, engineers, and contractors are ideal for locating the assets and then ideally attaching all the data you need to it. So from our perspective, we're sort of taking it, from pre-design through final submissions by the AC teams, and then from there it goes to some kind of FM and GIS program. So what we did is we received the model from Kimon, and we started incorporating our data structure in that model. And it includes not only design and documentation data, but it also includes, and this is per asset, and rooms and across all trades, architectural, structure, and MEP, includes data for design and documentation required by the architects, manufacturing information required by the GC or the subcontractors, and then operations and maintenance data. Because again, if I've got an air handling unit sitting in a model, that's the best place to be able to gather the data, enter the data by the various trades, and then harvest the data. So what we did is we have this program. We have Collectus. It's a library in the cloud, but it includes this entire data structure, so that as these assets are being dropped into the models, whether it's assets coming actually from Kimon system or assets coming from Collectus, the data structure is available for the teams to fill in. So what we did is we took that data structure, and the key for us was in this particular example, we were loading in a subset of the project. Actually, I'll show you an example here. So we said, well, these assets that Kimon has, here's my live screen. There were key assets regarding purchase order, installation date, warranty date. These were key important values that any owner would want for a particular asset. And again, we chose a room. We have data within that room, and this model becomes priceless in terms of the data structure. Again, from this setup that Kimon has, he can take the models and bring them back out to a data structure that can be usable by the owner for whatever FM or GIS programs that they're using. So from our perspective, these models can become they're data rich. That's the key. Again, with our experience with working for 20 years with architects, engineers, and contractors worldwide, the data structure had to be more consistent. Every architect that does projects, even internally with a firm like NBPJ, as an example, different teams within NBPJ are doing different types of data structures within the models, and the owner has to somehow translate that. And sometimes the data is there, sometimes it's not, and it's just inconsistent. So that's the creation of Collectus. Yes. Yes.
All right.
Mike.
Can I try to sum up
Please.
something? Just not to end your conversation, but
Of course.
to make it clear.
Please
So
do.
for as long as there has been BIM, there has been problems with information getting locked in the model. The the models are too big, and
Correct.
frequently owners throw those models out and walk around their buildings and collect serial numbers off of equipment. A total waste of time. So Collectus was created, and much of what you do at CDV Systems is help the owners break through the logjam of the model so that they can extract the disparate information in these different formats and have it be useful. So that's a great solution to that problem. And what you're seeing now in this it's only been a few weeks that you're working with Onuma. If owners require a structured approach to their asset management at the beginning, from the very beginning, then the work that you're doing is even more efficient, and they're able to get that information even easier.
Correct. Correct. This Collectus environment, again, without sounding salesy, the Collectus environment is designed to, it's an entire library, 36,000 components in the cloud for all the AEC team members to use, the architects, engineers, and contractors and subcontractors, with a BIM execution plan that's added to it, with an integrated BIM execution plan. But the key is that it includes data. So if I was to flip to the page, let's say, of the BIMX plan as an example here, as I'm moving things around, sorry about that. Here, the BIM execution plan includes data requirements for LOD 300. This is design and documentation by the architects. LOD 400 as-built data for the subcontractors, and LOD 500 digital twin data, again, the subcontractors, for all the operations and maintenance data. The data structure is in place. They simply place the objects and fill it in. They can, and literally the intention is, we want to harvest this data, and we don't want to send it to any kind of PDF file or CAD file or an Excel file. It's data rich in the model itself.
How many owners are following that approach?
Right now, well, the list of clients using this the components from Collectus, there are 50, 60 clients that we have that are currently using this structure. The owners are big enough because we have clients. UVA is as an example. University of Virginia, they have Collectus. It's a 3-year subscription, and they provide this entire library to all of their team members, architects, engineers, and contractors for any of their projects. There's no charge for them to use this product, but then it allows the UVA to actually view these models and to validate the models to make sure that they're in compliance, because there are tools within Collectus that allows an audit feature to check the model. Because if someone takes a door family from, let's say, a BIM city on the internet and drop it into the model, it's not going to have the same data structure, and thus there's a disconnect there. This audit checks the model to make sure that everything within the model is compliant, whether it's a component family or a system family or an annotation family. Now I'm digging into the weeds, but it's a tool it's a simple tool that the owner can use to check the models. Again,
So
with the intention.
We know of at least 2 institutions of higher education that are using this more advanced approach: University of Virginia and Los Angeles Community College. I'm sure there's others that are mirroring some of these, but it's not that big. There's a lot of room for many owners to improve.
Definitely.
Actually, if I can add something there, Cyril, that was a great point. I want to reinforce one of the things that you said, because if I put kind of the owner's hat on, like I mentioned earlier, we work with a lot of owners struggling with this exact problem, that they have a lot of consultants that are very advanced in BIM, but they have more than one building that they're working, for example, right? The owner has multiple projects, multiple buildings. And even if each AE has a perfect record of using BIM for that delivery, it's not consistent for the owner, because the owner's needs are, we want consistency across our entire portfolio. We don't want 100 great ideas. We want kind of the base level there. And this was a use case here, I think, we said if an owner has a structured set of information, whether it's very basic or whether it's more advanced, like we talked about the database of spaces and equipment, then it helps the owner actually drive the discussion back to the AEs for delivery back. I think that's what we've talked about earlier too, but what you reinforced here, I think that's a very important point that should not get lost, because we know this is a challenge across the industry. Is that correct? Did I characterize that right?
Absolutely. No, I was going to say when we speak with owners, we always tell them they say, well, how can we benefit from BIM? Who can benefit from BIM? You know, in terms of data, whether it's room data or asset data, and we display this list of departments within an institution. All of these departments can benefit from this data structure. The difficulty is that when the models are received, you can see I get a model from the architects, from the interior designers, from the medical planners, mechanical engineer, plumbing engineer, the contractors send their models. They're all in different languages. The data structure is different, and because of that, even the components. If the architect drops a component and the mechanical engineer wants to use the same component, they can't because the data structure is different. Ideally, they should be, and so the result is we want to have a common language across all these models done by all the various trades, so that when those models are submitted to the owner, they are data rich and ripe for harvesting. Again, the key with this is these models can allow location of assets, and if you can locate the asset and get it in a format that maintains it, you can manage it. And that's the key. Is, you know, I lectured at an event in Baltimore 3 weeks ago, and this owner walked up to me and said, actually the owner was from the Minnesota Twins, and he says, I get these drawings from the contractors and subcontractors. They are PDFs, they are JPEGs of floor plans, they are CAD files with no data. And for me, I end up having to walk the site and hand enter where these assets are, and that's insane when these models are data rich. So,
so this fits right into the ALN presentations that we've been doing for several years now, that we say that data is an asset. This is truly how you make data an asset, because it's not just a liability that you have to go and collect it twice.
Right.
You collect it once and you use it over and over again, right? And you use it across the portfolio, so not just a single project. Exactly. And the same data, which we'll show later, can make its way back into other systems as well too. So it's not a dead end. That's another important concept, is that all of these systems, we need to be talking to each other in better ways. It can't just end up, well, you know, we need to find one system that does everything, which is impossible. So if we're talking about asset management for the life cycle, it's a pretty broad need, and all of the different solutions and vendors and consultants need to think in those terms of how do we create that value for the owner, like we talked about earlier from what Roger said a couple sessions ago, that's what the goal should be.
Yep. This is just a quick ROI. If you're curious, we found that for a 500,000 square foot project, if you're not using harvesting BIM to populate your FM and GIS programs, it's between 6 and 18 months, and $50 an hour. There's a cost implication there. To create a BIM execution plan from scratch that includes data, there's a time and work effort there. To create the Revit templates used by the various trades, to create the content, again, collected as 36,000 components, it's a 2 to 4 year effort. And then they have to maintain that every year, because Autodesk is constantly revising what they do in Revit, and we have to update the templates and update the BXP and the content BIM execution plan. And then there's a salary, of course, for that individual. And there's multiple individuals, because the architects may not be comfortable using MEP, you know, so they may not know MEP. So again, this is what Collectus addresses as an example. This is what we're addressing, and of course, then the benefit of harvesting this data. Anyway,
that's great.
Thank you for that ROI information.
Of course,
thank you.
Very
good to see that.
Yeah.
Actually, Cyril, if you don't mind, can you zoom in on the that one room that we're going to be showing later?
Sure.
The exam room, right? We obviously did not do the whole building here, but we said, okay, let's focus on just one room in the building, and let's just kind of tell that story of how this made its way into Collectus and what else you added to it. So I'm going to show the screen next on our side, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh, should I make you the presenter?
No, you show what you have here.
Great.
And then we'll transition.
So what we did is we brought in, so Collectus, it's an icon sitting in Revit, and there's the library. These are the standards. if I look at, actually, this is probably, oh, this project actually set up here. Let me go here for a second. Well, let's talk about this. If I look at this one room, we decided we're going to focus on this one room, and we created a schedule in Revit. Here, this is a schedule that lists all the assets per room, and we decided to isolate this one room here. So if I highlight these and I want to show them in Revit, it actually highlights them in the model. So there's a direct link between what's in the schedule and what's in the Revit model. And then we brought in from Collectus the data structure for, again, this is a tiny subset of the data structure that's part of Collectus. We wanted to understand the purchase order number, the purchasing date, the installation date, the warranty date, the warranty labor end date. Is there a service contract? What's the service contract end date? Information that owners would the contractor has to provide, or the subcontractor has to provide. That's part of their deliverable. We're just forcing their hand to put it in the Revit model, because this one asset exists in this one location. And if the data can rest there, that's the ideal. Once you make a copy, you send it out to an Excel file or send it out to a PDF, you've lost that connection. So this is what we brought into the model from Kimon. If I was to show you this, I mean,
Cyril, one point I'd like to make there on that previous screen, if it's okay. So the names of the assets that we saw there, the medical equipment and the ID numbers, those actually originated from the owner database that we talked about earlier. So we're actually saying the owner actually drove these needs. It made its way all the way from the requirement model. Now it's in design and construction and Revit, and you're actually adding other attributes to that would give value back to the owner, the purchase order, the warranty information, all of that stuff that's of value, but it's in that structured format, which is why this is easier to connect back to what the owner's requirements. So we can do a comparison. Owner asked for this. Yes, we see the warranty information, or yes, we see the purchase order. Oh, this field is missing, or the name is wrong. Because that ID is matching up, we can start tracking those changes across these systems as we work through this.
Correct, and that key is that owner value is the key. If I open the BIM execution plan, because I want to make sure this is our live BIM execution plan sitting inside Collectus, visible for any of the users, of course, and it's an editable document. If I scroll through it, it's a form that's filled out. It's a BIM execution plan. But if I scroll down, there's diagrams that describe responsibilities and at what time during the process. But if I continue down here, I'm just going to get to a particular asset group. And I showed you air handling units earlier. So I think this is a good example. So here, this describes the data requirements for LOD 300, which is, again, the architects or engineers have to provide, LOD 400 for as-built, LOD 500 for digital twin. We're not talking about modeling to an LOD 4 and 500. It's more like LOI, level of information. And again, these are the requirements for the subcontractor to fill in the model. And this is the data structure that's already built. One of our clients, Pepperdine University, they had a request by the contractor. They said to the contractor, here's a list of parameters that look just like these. They gave them to the contractor. The contractor said, we can do this, but it's going to be a crazy amount of money to have to create this in the models and to then fill it in. Here, this data structure is defined in the BIMX plan, and it already exists in the content. It already exists within this library of, again, 36,000 components across all trades. And keep in mind, after we've set up standards for HOK, SOM, NBBJ, AECOM, Denver International Airport, all of these amazing clients for the last 20 years. It's not just content out of the box. It's our best practice workflows of how to use this content and has the data structure already built into it, standards, support.
So let me also do another description is Kimon has chocolate and you've got peanut butter and you guys have made a Reese's peanut butter cup because Kimon has built up things and working together, you're showing how to have this for the life cycle, not just of the building project, but for the entire asset management initiative.
That's the key.
You need to move away from projects and move to asset management initiatives.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it makes these models so incredibly useful, and this Kimon's workflow of being able to harvest the data now inside this data structure, that's the key. I mean, that's, it makes these models useful so that when owners get the models, they can use them. They're usable and data rich.
Yeah. So
So-
if we go to the next step, if it's okay,
Please go ahead.
Unless there's something else there, we can jump back again too, but I kind of want to follow the thread here. So you have it in
Go
the
right ahead,
model.
Kimon.
You've added.
Can you stop sharing, Cyril?
No,
I
it's
can.
okay. No,
Oh.
it's okay. I wanted him to show something on screen.
I
Okay,
can show
never
screen,
mind.
no problem.
Yeah. So I want to say what we did next. So what we did next is once you populated it, you're in Revit, and there's many ways of getting data out of Revit, right? You can export things, you can do Kobe, you can do a lot of things. But in our case, we
Correct.
actually used the plugin to export back to Onuma. So you've added more information there in Revit.
Correct.
There's the plugin.
Yep.
And
I'll
from the
go back.
plugin. Yeah.
If I go to the
That's good.
plugin here,
Yeah, so
so
basically-
here, let me go back to the model here. So from here inside Onuma, we went to export BIM XML. So that sent the model back to Onuma systems in a format that he can now absorb and harvest that data. So
Right.
should I pass that to you, Kimon?
Yeah, that's great. So just a couple of points here, because we're showing obviously a connection between us, but all of this works with other applications too. Even though we're showing these examples, you work with a lot of different applications, CMS, others. So I want to reinforce that. And for us too. But the important thing is you have machine readable data. We have an agreed upon format. We can use industry standards like Kobe or whatever, or structured formats that you have developed. And as long as the data communicates, we have the IDs that are tracking back and forth, which then allows us to quickly import the back end. And this is where Thomas came in when you worked with Thomas and this was the first time we actually did it. We kind of did it on the fly. We said, let's see if this works.
Right.
And for the BIMStorm. And so the next step would be, I could show my screen. Mike, was there something you wanted to say as we were switching over?
I kind of did before about the way that you're combining, and so yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we took the model that Cyril added to, and this, I guess this is the handover that we had. We handed over data, but we also handed over the XML file that Cyril mentioned. The XML file actually has the geometry as well. And because we're using the plugin, it's still related back to the original model that we had in Onuma. So it's not a new version of it. It's basically that continuation of that. And we can go back and forth, but we just did one pass back and forth. And I'll show a little bit of what that looks like in our model as well. So I'm going to switch over to my screen here. And there's a couple of themes here. One of them, I'm going to talk about the floors next too, Mike, because we wanted to bring that discussion in too. But
Yes.
in the model, so this is in Onuma now, the exact same model, the data that Cyril was showing earlier. We have the exact same room here. We have the floor materials and finishes that I talked about, the air changes that we adjusted based on ChatGPT. So we're seeing the results of the AI giving us guidances. You better change the air change in this room, it's wrong or whatever. And the floor material, we want floors that can stand, that are good for an exam room. And maybe this is a good time to bring in the floor discussion, Mike, if that's okay. And I could show a little bit more as we go through this.
Perfect, because this is actually one of the exciting things I like. I mean, all of this is really good, but Ryan Gear is an architect who's been involved with BIMStorm from the beginning. And Ryan, if you can join us now. And he's focusing on tile in part of his work. And I love the idea that we're thinking all the way down to cleaning the floors in the pre-planning aspect. So Ryan, thanks for joining us. We had originally specified linoleum floors, but you have expertise in healthcare. What did you see?
Well, I did go ahead and pick another linoleum that is healthcare specific, and we
PSD is linoleum?
And sorry, you're right. It's not. But what I wanted to point out is that what I really like about being able to work with the system is that it was super easy for me to attach the specific information to the specific room. You know, when we were looking for that specific data and being able to dig into the room, it was really easy for me to apply a new and upgraded material to the room. With the idea that we'd be going in and doing some repair on that room. So
Not
I'm not
repair, but redesign, because we're still in the pre-planning, right?
right. Well, this is looking forward, and kind of from the standpoint of we put some material down, we want to go back and put in some new material. What would that suggestion be? And that's really from the standpoint that I was working from. We're off in the future of working with this project maybe in the future. So, and that's kind of the standpoint that I took, if that makes sense.
That's great. That's great to explain how this works throughout the life cycle of this initiative.
Yeah, and it was interesting too, because you were getting on the plane an hour ago. We were kind of interacting while you were getting on the plane and getting off. So it was really last minute, but we wanted to kind of get that use case in here quickly. So thanks for doing that.
Well, and I think if I could jump in there and just comment on that, the capability of, and I was explaining it to somebody on the plane, that I was collaborating in real time globally, documenting specifics all the way down to the floor material. And I was able to do it within a very short period of time, but with the accuracy of delivering the exact information that's needed for the specification, maintenance, and some of the planning information that goes around just specifically the floor. So if you can imagine that you have all of those pieces, to me, everybody who's involved with any one specific portion of that room, and they've got to lend their expertise, it's easy for them then to retrieve that documentation at the room product level or the building level. So that was what I appreciated about it.
What did the person on the plane say?
He was, it's interesting, he's a military contractor, and his job was to source products. So it was so appropriate that we had this conversation about being able to have an immediacy of response, because what he says they have an F-18 on the tarmac, and they've got to get something there right away. They've got to know what they need, and they've got to know what's already on the ground, which is basically what we're talking about here today. So it was, and he does work with the Coast Guard. And so there was a lot of overlap with previous conversations around BIM storms and things like that, that just really kind of rang some bells for him. And he was like, wow, that's, sounds like a fantastic system to be able to have access to, and then be able to respond with confidence. Really, that's what this is all about, right?
Reducing risk. And we'll get Jack Dempsey to talk about that a little bit later on.
Yeah. So one other angle to this too, and this is, we landed like I mentioned earlier, the building in Los Angeles City College. So this is actually, again, an Onuma system with a GIS background. So this is a clinic we were just looking at. In Los Angeles Community College case, this is an actual ongoing project with them on our other buildings. They're very interested in floor finishes because they're tracking maintenance and operation and custodial. How much time and effort do we need to spend on cleaning, and what level of service? Actually, they're using APA standards embedded in part of this process. How do we define what floors are? So knowing what the floor finish is, knowing what the maintenance on that floor is, knowing the size of the room, because that's critical too. If you just have an area of all these floors and all of a sudden you could say how many square feet of linoleum do we have or whatever, and it gives you a report, a summary report that says, well, this is your square footage. So these shapes, as far as assets goes, as far as spaces go, it's an asset of a space, of a building, and of the individual equipment in the building for the mechanical, and also for the property, that like the medical equipment. But let's zoom back into this one room that Cyril was talking about earlier. So now we're not inside Revit, we're not inside the system that Cyril was showing, but we're in this case, Onuma system. And if I look at an individual asset here, and I click on that asset and look at the attributes, I see, let's see, where is it? Purchase order. I did not enter this. This all came from Cyril's data. the serial number, all of that. So it made its way here, and we added, and we'll talk about barcodes and QR codes later, but essentially this allows us to see the same information now if we're shifting into operations, facility management and operation for the assets. Any comments or questions there? Okay.
So just to be clear, I mean, from our perspective, again, harvesting the data, whatever the parameter is, it can be brought out of the model and into the system. Oh my God, it's very exciting to see. So
great. Yeah, and then I think you and I were talking about the geospatial aspect of this too. So I noticed that we zoomed in from a map, right? So there's latitude and longitude in the building. It's precise location,
right?
The shape, and now we're inside the room, inside the building, in a geospatial location with a very precise room number, and then an ID that has information that we use for facility management that tracks all the way back to what we talked about earlier. At the state level, they're managing for the entire state of all the spaces, but now if we're in an individual room, in this case, it's a building that it's a theoretical building. We're not showing an actual construction in this case, but it's very, very similar to how they would think in terms of spaces in a building and how do we manage and maintain them.
And that same data could be used by the police or fire department or custodial or capital planning, space plan. I mean, the use cases are endless, truly.
In Los Angeles Community College District, the teachers are using it to know what rooms are available so that they can plan classes.
Exactly.
Yep. Or submit work orders. Yeah. And yeah, the data, for example, here, immediately while we have it here, we have and I touched on the APIs earlier, but there's what's called an API, which means other applications can read this data. So in the Los Angeles Community College's case, there's another application called DabbleFox that's used for custodial planning. They're reading the data from Onuma, but they're seeing it in DabbleFox. We're reading the room names and numbers from Fusion, but we're seeing it in Onuma. The data becomes neutral, becomes an asset of that owner, and then you use it over and over again, but we're all looking at the same source of information because every single owner that we work with struggles with this. They have different systems that have different room numbers, so they can't figure out where are our assets, which room we are. It's something as simple as that. It's not an easy thing to do, but as soon as you start wiring these systems together, then it becomes possible.
Yeah, it's funny.
Actually, this is Thomas. Actually, even the planes that we have in Onuma are shown in the other application. So even the planes can be with an API can be called up so that in DabbleFox you can actually look at the planes that come directly from Onuma.
That's right. That's an important point too, because we want to make sure we're in alignment with what because DabbleFox is using the plans to count square footage for custodial planning. We're using the plans to count areas for other purposes, but it's the same shape. That 120 square feet of that exam room is the same shape and the same data.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So this is another view of that clinic with different data associated with it, and then kind of a dashboard view that gives us information about each space. This is, again, same data, different view. Nothing really magical about a dashboard, but the magic here is that we're looking at the same data that Cyril was showing us just a few minutes ago, as far as spaces and information related to them.
Nothing magical about a dashboard, but it's hugely important because what it does is allow non-expert stakeholders to understand complex information. So I actually disagree, Kimon. Dashboards are really important.
Yeah, dashboards are pretty popular for that reason, because you can have executives actually seeing information that they don't want to see in a plan, for example. They want to see dollar signs and whatever cost associated with a space. So there's many different use cases for the same data. I guess that's the point here. So let's see, how are we doing on time? We got 13 minutes.
Thanks for pointing that out. We have covered a huge amount of ground in an hour. We've got that in. We still want to look at work orders, and then we want to open it up. Cyril's colleague, Jason Sherbert and Thomas and Young, and we want Jack Dempsey to give an owner's perspective also. So those of you can stick around. We're going to have a little bit more technical information and then discussion.
Yeah, that's great. Since you mentioned owner, let's jump back to the owner for a second before we go into work orders. So we mentioned at the very beginning that owner drives a lot of this. We need to design, construct, manage assets, right? We inserted a use case here in the middle of this for tracking total cost of ownership, which Deke Smith and Jack have been giving us input as well. So we said, okay, we want to start thinking in terms of energy. So if all the information that we fed into ChatGPT, we asked a question like estimate the energy use if we want LEED certification. So it started spitting information back to us. Some of it is off maybe, but it's pretty close, a lot of it, at least to give us an idea of what to look for. It started calculating how much water usage, this kind of stuff. Then we said, calculate the carbon footprint and extrapolate it to a 50-year life cycle. Okay, then it said, well, here are the answers for that. We didn't do a detailed quality check on this other than saying, well, that's interesting. It's doing stuff with the data that we fed into it. Now it's giving us carbon footprint calculations. And then we said, give us a total cost of ownership. What's it going to look like? Well, here's the things you need to consider. It gives us some formulas. And then Deke gave us input. Let's see, where was Deke? Deke, let me jump ahead here. So we asked Deke Smith what his thoughts were on total cost of ownership. And he gave us some input. Well, total cost of ownership, we also need to think about natural disasters and how you deal with it. Take into account, well, there's a use case in Nicaragua where they had an earthquake and it wiped out every hospital. So the hospitals were not functional because they weren't planned to withstand the earthquake, which is basically an asset that wasn't properly designed, possibly, but that's a lesson learned. So in Nicaragua, they had a lot of issues like this after the earthquake, hospitals falling down. So it's a question about resiliency. In other words, there's a lot of different factors involved with making decisions about the total cost of ownership. So then our final question to ChatGPT is, consider everything you told us, 50 years. We have a calculation for how much this building is going to cost because we drove it out from the Onuma system, $7 million plus. What's the total cost of ownership with all the factors that you gave us? Actually do a calculation. So it started doing calculation. Then we said, put it into a table. So this is a table that it gave back to us. I don't know if these numbers are accurate. It's something to consider, but the initial design, construction, getting the building running is $7 million, let's say. And then ChatGPT said, well, here's the recurring costs, and we're getting a 45% savings on energy because we're using LEED. We're getting 40% on utilities, the maintenance costs. So it's showing us what the ROI is of spending that extra money up front to be able to plan for resiliency, for total cost of ownership, and for other factors. So from an owner's perspective, these are discussions that are important before the building is built, and also to plan for the whole life cycle. When you think in terms of an asset for the life cycle, these are things to consider. All of these numbers need to be checked. We didn't check them very closely. We just wanted to demonstrate the workflow and the possible use case there. Any thoughts on that before I go into the work order?
Maybe Jack Dempsey, if you could address this, if it's something that you want to comment on.
Yeah. So what's exciting about this is, you know, if you're like an executive in an organization, you know, the people are talking to one another. You know, the data is there, it's being shared, it's being evaluated, decisions are being made using good data and good communications. So that's an assurance or reassuring, you know, the value of all this. I think, you know, the challenge is people have to kind of get used to that operating environment and the understanding that this information is being exchanged and it's being curated in a way that's supporting decision making, and it's also, you know, established ways that have integrity. I mean, some of the points that come up is when you're exchanging information about a design activity with the operations group, you know, you might not be ready to, you know, you're not ready to go, this is the answer, to get the feedback. So that process has to be learned as well. So the technology is giving us a tremendous amount of power, visibility, integration, supporting communications. But what is also going to have to happen is we're going to have to develop new behaviors and learn how to communicate leveraging these tools. So as exciting as it is, and it is very exciting, and it will be changing our operating environments, we also need to be careful and understanding of the human in the loop activity, and ensure that they're aware and understanding of how this is changing things, so that way they can be confident as decisions are being accelerated in ways that we're still learning about.
I think one way for the owners to do that is to have these type of charrettes, these types of BIMstorms prior to the project, and they could basically learn by doing.
Yeah, and as Kimon made the point earlier, you kind of have to start. You have to start somewhere, and it's a good time to start learning about these tools, because it is going to accelerate the industry, and people who learn how to apply them are going to be advantaged, although it is going to take some time to figure it all out.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
also
3
find it
weeks.
interesting- No, needs more than that from here, but yeah, it's a good start. But what's interesting too is the whole ISO discussion from an asset management perspective. You guys, I've heard this from Jack and from ALN many times, but being able to kind of define what we need to be thinking of, right? And kind of create a standard around, well, here are the steps or things that you should consider. It seems like it fits right in with that as well too, I believe, even though I'm not an ISO expert, ISO 55000.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the genius behind the ISO standards, management system standards, is there's a rubric, like kind of a single structure, they call it a harmonized structure, on how all management systems operate. That's the genius in there. And it's being applied across dozens now of topics. Quality management is a big one. People are familiar with that. Environmental management, asset management is coming on strong. But there's literally dozens of places within an organization about a management system that are all using the same rubric. So as organizations learn and understand that, it's an accelerator to integrate more and more parts of the organization to kind of bring all this information together. So it's right in step with the AI and this integrated kind of operating environment. And I think those management system standards, and particularly that rubric, are essential to make sure that that organizations are in fact behaving appropriately in terms of management systems. It is in itself a system, and it is a system for management. So I think there's great advantage there, and I think organizations will learn more and more about how these two kind of capabilities come together that will help move the ball along.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and these standards too, obviously they're very important, but they a lot of times people kind of from the outside it seems very complicated, but really the standard helps set the stage to describe in a simple format what to do, right? That's one way I look at it. So for example, the APA standards we talked about earlier, there's a lot of stuff happening in APA, but the end result, the use case is the custodial and maintenance staff on Los Angeles Community College campus know that they get a request that this room needs attention. They don't need to know all the underlying whatever, but it creates that consistency across the organization. I think that's the value there too.
Yeah, I think I mean, an analogy I've heard that I think really fits is, people put brakes on cars thinking that these standards slow you down. People put brakes on cars so you can go faster.
Yeah,
So the standards are really trying to protect ourselves about the speed by which we're operating, to make sure that we can go faster where we can, but we're doing it in a controlled way.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So moving faster to being able to take the information that is in pre-planning and keep it through design and construction, and then use it for work orders. That's perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so we're at work orders now. So we're jumping way ahead into now the building is complete. But before then we said, okay, let's create a task. We actually created a task. Let's put some QR codes into that exam room and to the roof of the building where we had the mechanical. So we actually simulated that here. Not simulated, actually it's live. The data from Searle that we had about the purchase order and whatever, it's in the equipment like I showed earlier. We added QR codes to each piece of equipment. And we also, let me just open the screen. Oops, that didn't work. Got too many things going here, maybe. Okay, so let's just keep it here. Didn't want to open on a separate screen. And then we have a QR code for the entire room, and this is actually active. I'm going to leave this on screen a little bit here, but I'll show you a little bit about how that looks. You can try this. Everybody can actually try this. It's actually open. So I have my camera here, and I'm going to go and scan this QR code. It scans it. It opens it up in this tool we call BIM Genie. BIM Genie is reading off the server that I talked about earlier, reading the information about that building and landing me in this space. See how it automatically populates? Okay, it knows I'm in the clinic, it knows I'm on level 1, it knows I'm in that exam room that we talked about earlier. And this use case here is I'm an occupant. I know nothing about BIM, I know nothing about facilities. I know there's something wrong with the floor. The floor has a hole in it. And then I'm gonna put my name in and my information, and that's it. Basically, I could put more information in there, but I can hit submit. And what this does is it sends a request. Thomas in the background here is acting as the admin. So I'm just the occupant. I'm the teacher in that room, or an occupant in the room, a student, and I've submitted a request. So it says, thank you for your request. You'll get an email. And now I'm tracking. So this is real-time data now. We're in digital twin territory now, right? Because we're using the data that was harvested, like Cyril mentioned earlier. We're live in the building and we're interacting with the model. We're interacting with the assets. We're interacting with the facility teams. And we're talking about the floor that has an issue that we need to be replaced possibly. Like we talked about earlier, maybe this is a floor that is damaged and needs replacing. We need to find out what kind of floor goes in that room. So we need a database. What's this original specification? What's the performance required to be able to support an exam room? So that's one use case. And when I open up the work order, and I'm flipping different hats here, but now I'm seeing it as an admin. Go away from the iPhone view and looking at our desktop. Now I'm starting to get the requests that just came in. So these are requests that have been submitted today. And I can open that up and I can assign that to a technician, go and check the floor. Okay, I see as the admin, somebody submitted, I can see the location of BIM, even though the admin doesn't know anything about BIM, they know about facilities. I go, yeah, that's the room. Let's see, there's some kind of components in that room. There's something in that room that has whatever, there's a component. So I can see all the assets in that room. There's a computer and a side chair if I'm talking about that, but here in this case, we're talking about a floor. And I can say, I'm gonna assign this to technician. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, you already assigned it to yourself.
Oh yeah, I
so you
assigned it
have
to
to
myself.
reassign it.
Okay, I'm going to assign it to Ryan and save and return. So anyway, that's just a glimpse of what happens with this data now at the facility side, managing, like we talked about with APA standards for the custodial, managing the response to the request that was sent in. And if there's another room, that temporary clinic that I talked about earlier, again, in the simple interface, we can dive into that building and load the room, point to the room and say there's something happening in that room and go through that same process again. This is exactly the way we're dealing with a lot of thousands of work requests like this and preventive maintenance and work orders in our system called the BIM Genie. But I want to stress again that the output from Revit that Cyril showed can also go through COBie into other CMS systems. So this is not the only solution. The difference here is that we wanted to show the live link altogether and to give you access to it if you'd like to submit a request here. The technician that walks into the field and walks into the room, now they have QR codes on each individual equipment. So if they don't know which one is the defibrillator or whatever they're looking for, they can scan it and it'll pull up the purchase order, the warranty information, other information about it, and then interact directly with the requester. So it's a real-time connection back to the original request. We have the same scenario set up on the roof for mechanical equipment, mechanical assets. So on the roof of the building, we have, oops, I did the same thing again. Sorry, I'm hitting the wrong buttons here. We have equipment set up that, oh, and by the way, this equipment was recommended by ChatGPT. We said for this clinic, with these kind of LEED Platinum goals, what kind of systems should we consider to put in the building? And some of them are whole systems, some of them are actual equipment. Give us IDs, and we fed that back into the model to actually place objects on the roof, which still needs some engineering decisions, but at least we have a line of things to consider, including a photovoltaic installation to generate energy. So this is one result of the AI basically giving us recommendations to meet the LEED whatever, and then us putting that back into the building. I'm moving this thing around, so I'm messing up the layout, but anyway. So if anybody wants to try and get to the roof as well, you can actually scan this and get to it as well. So we covered a lot. There's a lot more. Actually, that's one thing we need to emphasize here. There's a ton more stuff that we could show. There's a lot of stuff in the background, but then we get into the weeds. We're very happy to have any follow-on discussions through ALN. I think, Mike, you were interested in setting some things up, but that'd be interesting to see where else can we take this. This is still an experiment, although everything that we showed you is actual real-world scenarios that are actually happening in our work. We're sharing what we're doing, and then we're exploring where else this can go.
So thank you, Kimon, for passing it back to me and talking about the future and expanding on this. And it's because you and all of your colleagues at Onuma Inc. are interested in advancing the asset management industry that we're able to do this. So we really appreciate your organizational platinum membership in the ALN. And I know you've got something coming up with the American Institute of Architects Tokyo chapter, so we'll be letting people know about that coming up. But then we'll figure out how to do things in this format going forward. We're even going to establish a ALN executive briefing for owners who want to have people come together and provide direct information for them. They'll be able to buy a executive briefing, a series of 3 web programs and interactions. So we'll have information on that, and that's thanks to you and Cyril and other members, Definitive Logic, etc., Jack Dempsey, who are interested in doing that. But before we go any further, I wanted Jason Sherbert to come on. And I don't want you to necessarily have to talk about anything that we've been doing. I know you've been working with Cyril to get things going, but maybe share some perspective on what the owners are experiencing and how you think this approach is going to be helpful to owners.
Mike, I wish Jason was here. He had to step out. There was something going on with his family that he had to leave. I'm not sure why, but he had to step out. So my apologies for that.
I hope his family is doing well. No need to apologize.
Thank you.
Young, if you could step in and make some comments, that would be great.
Yes, thanks, Mike. Jack, I appreciate that one comment that you made about breaks and standards. I think that was dead on. A lot of the things that we are working on, and since you have known us for close to 2 decades now, a lot of the things that we work on, it's actually building on standards on top of standards. So there is this exponential capability where we're not, all of this isn't just baked overnight. I mean, this is all things that have evolved over time. So this is something that is interesting for us. The things that we are able to do, it's only because things not only become the new and exciting things that are coming up in the industry, but we're actually leveraging some principles that we have that has been a solid core for years. Like, so for instance, when Kimon was using those QR codes into the spaces, one core principle that we have had for a while, for instance, is each room, each space actually being its own unique ID location. It's basically like a specific address within that space. And that, by maintaining those kinds of principles, that gives us an explosion of capabilities into leveraging some of these new technologies, including QR codes. It really becomes an interesting way for us to build and not just jump on the latest and greatest technologies, but to really have some continuity with a lot of the principles that we've developed over the years.
Excellent. Thank you, Young. The other thing that I liked that Jack said was the ability for the owners to know that people are talking with each other. I had never even thought of that. And that's huge. So we're coming up to the end here. We've covered a lot. We've heard comments from a number of sources. So I think, Kimon, it's fine for us to wrap it up.
Mhm.
If you want to make any
Yeah.
closing comments.
This was great. I hope it inspired some thoughts on where this can go. Like I said, we're just scratching the surface, and we're going to continue to test. And like you mentioned, this BIMStorm is going to continue. We're going to actually present this. We're calling it the AIA presentation to the AIA in Japan, the American Institute of Architects chapter in Japan. It's going to be in English. It's a free session. Anybody can join. It's actually timed so it fits the US time zones as well. It's going to be on May 23rd. We're going to be continuing with this AI thread, focusing on the AIA from an architect's perspective now, architects and machines. Obviously, other people can be involved, but that's where we're heading next.
And we will have information about how to register for this in the ALN newsletter. So look for registration information there. And Nick, if you can come in and provide some comments. Nick has been sending me some chats saying how impressed he is by this. If you want to make any comments and then bring us home.
Yeah, like we've said, we've covered a lot today, but one of the pieces that always sticks with me is just integrating different software systems and processes, just really taking a big picture, life cycle, holistic, lots of ways to describe this sort of systems thinking. But really like the tools that Cyril and Kimon have brought together here and showcased, and of course, it's not about the tools in the end, it's about the outcome. It's about the value that it can bring to any organization, any government, any process. Just again, that integrating systems thinking.
Thank you.
That's my main takeaway.
And we should let Cyril make a closing comment. Also, while Kimon lets Nick get ready to thank our sponsor. So Kimon, Cyril, you can come on. And Nick, yeah, there you go.
Great. No, I each time I see this presentation, I'm excited about what Kimon and his group are doing with AI. It's pretty impressive, and it's constantly growing. So that it's very exciting to see, how the owners can benefit from this, from pre-design right through, operations of the building when it's completed. So that excites me. So and thank you, ALN. Thank you, ALN, for this opportunity to have this presentation. This is a remarkable. We're delighted to be members here, and it's just recent that we were members. So
that's exactly what I was going to say. The thanks are to you, Cyril, for becoming a member and jumping in. We've done 3 programs, each are 3 weeks apart. You saw the first one and were blown away, and you got involved, and look what you did. It's not just the AI, it's how your systems worked together.
Right.
Because we both were on the same track of having secure, open standards for sharing information, knowing what the future is going to require, not being burdened and stuck in the past. And one of the things that we really want to focus on is the continual improvement. If an owner is not interested in continually improving, we don't want to waste their time. But
Agreed.
If they do, we've got proven systems.
Yeah, and Kimon and I have already spoken a number of times prior to this presentation that we are continuing this dialogue and continuing to prepare and showcase what we're doing. So we're quite excited about that.
We'll look forward to that.
Indeed.
All right. So Nick, can you bring us home?
Of course.
Mike, can I say one thing?
Oh, please.
To what Cyril said, I think it's an important point that we were able to connect so quickly, because it's not just the technology connections. A lot of time there's a fear of exposing or sharing too much. And that's been one of the themes with BIMStorms that we found over and over again. that if we can connect quickly, it shouldn't be something, well, it's going to take a year to talk about it. Let's just do it and see what works and keep moving, because most challenges of connecting have nothing to do with the technology. It's all about the governance and the leadership and the ability of an organization to jump in and have that fearless factor to it. And I think the ALN is a great venue to kind of drive that leadership home throughout the organization.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much to Kimon Onuma and Onuma System, our ALN Platinum organizational member, as well as Young's participation, and everyone else from the team that helped do the preparation for these sessions. Thanks also to our ALN patron members, especially new member CGI Federal, which we have some upcoming programs with. Stay tuned. And our other organizational members, as well as CDV Systems, of course, with Cyril Verle, and AMP Asset Management Partnership with Jack Dempsey's participation today, and all our organizational members. Really, you guys make this possible, so thank you very much. And if you're interested in collaborating with us, becoming an organizational member, working together, please reach out. We would love to see how we can grow together.
And thank you to our attendees. We've had many of our organizational members are watching to see how they can participate in the future. We appreciate that level of participation also.
And just to note, we have a lot of upcoming events Thursday, well, later today, even with Value and Benefits webinar at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then, of course, tomorrow's Thursday at 3, next week's Thursday at 3, and more. So stay tuned.
Yeah, so thank you to Jack Dempsey also for joining, and we look forward to talking with Jack tomorrow. Thank you, Nick. Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
See you later.